Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Yes, Faisal, the police force is, as you say, facing a profound crisis of confidence. The question is, what can be done? Of course, you have to remember there isn't just one force. There are 43 forces in England and Wales alone. Each has their own command structure, their own chief constable, their own police and crime commissioner, an elected figure to oversee them, and of course the Home Secretary herself atop of all that. Some think it might be better if there was more standardisation, more merging of some of these many forces in order to better drive reform. There has been agglomeration over the years, and in Scotland, not uncontroversially, they have moved to one force, Police Scotland, and then of course the PSNI in Northern Ireland. But it is the Metropolitan Police which is at the centre of this crisis, and Dame Cressida Dick's leadership in particular. And you can't understand this crisis without understanding the context of its repeated failures, and indeed hers, in recent years. Famously, in 2011, Dame Cressida, when an assistant commissioner, was in charge of the operation which tragically killed the innocent Jean-Charles de Menezes at Stockwell Underground Station. In 2014, she was in charge of Operation Midland, the ill-fated investigation into a fabled Westminster paedophile ring. It turned out, of course, to be nonsense, with lives ruined in the process. Then, in 2019, as commissioner, she received criticism over what some thought was the non-existing policing over the Extinction Rebellion protests. In July 2020, the Met was accused of racial profiling, criticised for handcuffing the Team GB athlete Bianca Williams and partner whilst driving a BMW. In March 2021, the heavy-handed policing of the Sarah Everard vigil outraged many, especially by comparison to the apparent light touch policing of some football events at around the same time. And most damningly of all, in June 2021, the independent panel report into the 30-year investigation of the murder of Daniel Morgan said that the Met was institutionally corrupt, and Cressida Dick herself was personally censured for obstruction of the inquiry. Indeed, the Met is one of only 6 police forces in England and Wales where Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary rates the extent to which, quote, the force is effective at reducing crime and keeping people safe as either requires improvement or inadequate, one of their key indicators. So, to get a grip of the Met, you could change the top, but Commissioner Dick continues to enjoy significant political support from both the Home Secretary and the Mayor of London. Indeed, she was reappointed only last month. Perhaps then, the question isn't whether it's fair to expect Commissioner Dick to resign over this alone, but taken with everything else, whether she can lead the sort of change that we've seen in the past. For example, after the Macpherson report into the murder of Stephen Lawrence and institutional racism in the police. Now, Labour has called for exactly that sort of fully independent inquiry to examine the events of this case and examine the question of the culture of the Met towards women, just as happened with the culture of the Met with racism in the 1990s, something it appears, for now at least, the government will resist. The question then, short of a change of leadership, of an inquiry or commission, is what, if anything, emerges from all of this to restore a breach in confidence at the heart of policing. Faisal.
Thanks, Lewis. Joining me in the studio, we have Baroness Helena Kennedy, who chairs the Working Group on Misogyny and Criminal Justice in Scotland, which aims to independently consider how the Scottish criminal justice system deals with misogyny. This includes looking at whether misogyny should be a hate crime. And down the line, we have Chris Phillips, formerly the head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office for the Met, and the forensic criminologist Jane Monckton-Smith, Professor for Public Protection at the University of Gloucester. Jane Monckton-Smith, let's start with you. Give us a sense of this misogyny problem in the criminal justice system, the different conviction rates and the scale of the problem.
Well, the scale of the problem is part of the problem, I think. Once you turn this rock over and you start looking at how widespread violence against women and girls is, it can seem as if the problem is too big a hill to climb. So, but there are some things that we should be doing, and we should be doing immediately. And that is, we've got to stop excusing and justifying male violence. We have to stop minimising it, and we have to stop protecting the offenders, and which is quite possibly what happened in this case, because Wayne Couzens' offences may have been seen as non-serious.
Okay, well, Helena Kennedy, let's, one solution, we've heard about it already twice tonight, is this issue of making misogyny a hate crime. You're working on this for the Scottish Government. How would that tangibly have changed things in cases such as this?
Well, I have no doubt that the judge, who's a very, very distinguished judge who who dealt with this case and sentenced, I have no doubt that he saw this as a misogynistic crime. The whole nature of it showed something very disturbing about the nature and the pre-planning and the torture and so on. That to do that there was something that made him say that this had to be life meaning life, and that suggests to me that there was already he was dealing with it. That there was the aggravating factor that this was a man who was doing this because of some malevolent attitude towards women. And so I think that in some cases judges are already doing this, but in many of the other kinds of misogynistic behaviours, I mean, which put women in fear, and as Jane has just said, are often of a lesser, they seem to be lesser, threatening and abusive behaviour, harassment in public places and so on. Those things are often being very dismissed as not the sort of things that police should be prioritising, especially when the police are under-resourced, there are fewer of them and so on, that they start seeing this stuff as not important. And yet what we're seeing is that often is an indicator of more serious crime to come.
And so how would it work in practice? So, currently in the criminal justice system, if something's racially aggravated, you get an extra sentence. Is that the sort of thing we're talking about? Is this where this could go?
Well, that would be one element of it. I've actually, my mission is somewhat bigger than a misogynistic hate crime. I want us to be looking at the fact that most women now feel that they actually do not think the justice system is working well for them. They see what's happening in rape and domestic violence and all of that. They see that when they complain about stalking or harassment, that nothing is done about it, so that there's a real loss of confidence. And I do think that there has to be some other steps taken. There has to be better training around this. And I think Sue Fish has given evidence in front of my working party. And she really did take a strong leadership role in this. And I think it would be rather good to see the Commissioner of the Met Police doing a similar thing. I do think that there ought to be some, bringing in of some outside voices into the police to talk about all of this. It's not about one bad apple. It's about police making priorities, and it's against a culture which exists within the police, but it's also a culture in wider society, which is about women suffering this stuff because of male entitlement, of men feeling that somehow women's bodies are within their purview, somehow feeling entitled to behave in these ways. Now, not all men, but it's sufficient numbers to make women's lives miserable.
Let me bring in Chris. I mean, you've served as a police officer, and this has been a pretty grim moment. I think everyone would agree. Do you think the culture needs to change, and do you think retraining is the solution?
Well, I think we're focusing on the police here, when actually it's the wider criminal justice system and actually society itself that's really to fault. The difficulties that police find in having the staff to do the investigation for many of these crimes. I mean, the cutbacks have been horrendous in policing, and we've seen that. But also actually getting cases into the court system and through the CPS has proved very, very difficult. So I think to focus just on the police, this is a societal issue about females being assaulted. We had a young lady murdered just a few days ago in London, and this is almost become the norm. But I would say as well that we are focusing on this point in time because, and I know there's been a bit of upset about calling him a bad apple, but this guy has murdered someone in most horrendous circumstances. But actually, we've had 250,000 police officers in London over the last 100 odd years. And we haven't been talking about this before, this seriousness of crime. This is one man who has got through. And I think, yes, there are many other instances of police officers acting badly, but this is on a whole different level.
But you don't think that, for example, there could have been, if people had been watching more carefully for this, they could have stopped him earlier, why he was a policeman in the first place? It just shows a kind of culture of neglect of this issue, that this man was a police officer to begin with.
Well, I mean, I can go back to my time, and there were a number of officers that I thought that really should have been sacked and weren't suitable to be police officers. And it was very, very difficult through legislation to get rid of them at that time. Now, those may have changed, those situations may have changed. But I think my understanding is that the offences that happened very close to this poor girl's abduction and murder, it would have been quite difficult for the police actually to even have identified who he was, being a police officer, and dealt with him. So because it wasn't put to the top of the priority list. But then again, there's many other cases that those officers would have had to deal with at the same time that may have been of higher priority in their eyes and in the eyes of the police service.
So do you think that there's a risk of an overreaction of throwing the baby out with the bathwater here?
I think very much so. And, we all, every police officer that I can imagine is so upset about this case. But we do have to be very careful that we don't throw all of the good policing stuff that we do. All the police officers are out there every day. And don't forget, police officers are involved in millions of interactions with members of the public on a daily basis across the country. And of course, things are going to go wrong. This is humans on humans. And yes, we as a society, I believe, have got many problems, and of course the police just reflect those problems within its midst.
Well, let me bring Jane in there. Chris, they're saying the police are a reflection of society and that they have resource constraints. Looking at some of the earlier crimes that you were suggesting that they need to pay bigger focus to.
Well, I take what has been said about resources. Police are definitely under-resourced, but I do take issue with some of the things that have just been said about when Cousins being represented as a bad apple. Bad apples should be identified and should be ejected. But this man was allowed to operate across police forces, in more than one police force, with behaviours where his own colleagues had a nickname for him, calling him the rapist. So this isn't just simply a case of a bad apple, even if that's what Wayne Cousins is. This is about an institution that allowed him to thrive within its ranks and to be able to go out and commit this crime. And other crimes.
Let me bring Helen in here. I mean, there's talk of inquiries and commissions. I mean, what difference can that really
Well, first of all, I think Scotland was actually ahead of the game here in identifying very early on that something would have to be done, because women were saying very loudly and clearly, and being listened to, saying something has to be done. They therefore set up this particular inquiry. They had created legislation for hate crime that they felt that the issue concerning women actually needed a deeper dive and to look at it more closely. Now, I think there should be some sort of investigation here. I do think that the officer is right, the former police officer, in saying that, of course there are many good police officers. Let's accept that. But inside policing, any institution, there's a temptation to protect your own, to look after the backs of your mates, and that camaraderie can often be for a positive thing when you need that, but sometimes it can work in a very negative way, in which women talk about making complaints about sexism, and they pay the price because it's somehow, to grass on your mates is bad. So you've got to do something about that. We know the institutions cover up because they try to protect their own reputation. They can't do that. There has to be, this moment should be used to say, aren't we entitled to expect more of our police? And can we do something about the culture? And then can we do something about the wider culture in our society, which allows this kind of constant business of diminishing women, this sort of horrible corrosion of women's experience of life, where they have to go through this stuff every day of being abused, of being denigrated, and being made to feel that they somehow have less value than men.
Helen Kennedy, thank you very much for that. Big questions, important questions. Thank you for coming into the studio. And thank you, Chris Phillips and Jane Monkton-Smith, too, for joining us.